All right, everybody. I want to welcome you back. I am doing a little blast from the past in terms of programming. Um, some of you might remember I have the President Bill and not President Hillary Clinton Presidential Penitentiary Library that is actually behind me if you're looking right there. Um, and I've gone through a lot of books, and a few months ago, I was doing a I was reading Hillary Clinton's first autobiography, Living History. Now, I think she's up to three now because she did hard choices after her term as Secretary of State, and then she recently did that What Happened debacle that I have not yet bought because I'm not paying 17 bucks to that piece of shit just to see a book about lies and distortions when in probably a few weeks I'll be able to pick one up for $2 from some asshole in Kansas. So, without further ado, let's get into this because there's a lot to get through. Okay, so the early events of her life included this claim that Edward Brooke was out of touch at her graduation speech. Now, for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, Hillary Clinton attended one of the most elite colleges in Massachusetts, Wellesley College, which is at the time was an I think it still is an all women's school. It's an elitist Ivy League school, and she claimed that the only black senator at the time, who happened to be a Republican, not that it matters, he was out of touch because he was claiming that the campus activism wasn't really productive, it wasn't leading anywhere, and she actually said the word inarticulable there. Let me pull it up. Page 41. Um, Let me read directly from her autobiography. It says, I thought how President LD, I think LD is one of her friends at Wellesley, had been to know that a predictable speech like this one would be such a letdown after the 4 years we and America had experienced. So I took a deep breath and began by defending the indispensable task of criticizing and constructive protest. Paraphrasing Anne Scheebner's poem, which I quoted at the end, I stated that the challenge now is to practice politics as the art of making what appears to be impossible possible. I spoke about the awareness of the gap between the expectations my class brought to college and the reality we experienced. Most of us had come from sheltered backgrounds, and the personal and public events we encountered caused us to question the authenticity, even the reality of our pre-college lives. Our 4 years had been a rite of passage different from the experiences of our parents' generation, which had faced greater external challenges like the Depression and World War II. Well, she's right about that. So we started asking questions, first about Wellesley's policies, then about the meaning of liberal arts education, then about civil rights, women's roles, and Vietnam. I defended protest as an attempt to forge an identity in this particular age, and as a way of coming to terms with our humanness. It was part of the unique American experience, and if the experiment in human living doesn't work in this country, in this age, it's not going to work anywhere. When I asked the class at our graduation rehearsal what they wanted me to say for them, everyone answered, talk about trust, talk about the lack of trust both for us and the way we feel about others, talk about the trust bust. I acknowledged how hard it was to convey a feeling that permeates a generation. And finally, I spoke of the struggle to establish a mutuality of respect between people. Mutuality. I don't even know if that's a word. Um, Running through my words, however, was an acknowledgement of the fears many of us felt about the future. I referred to a conversation from the previous day with a classmate's mother who said that she wouldn't want me to be me for anything in the world. She wouldn't want to be me for anything in the world. She wouldn't want to live today and look ahead to what it is she sees because she's afraid, I said. Fear is always with us, but we just don't have time for it. Not now. The speech was, as I admitted, an attempt to come to grasp with some sort of the inarticulate, maybe even inarticulable things that we're feeling as we are exploring a world that none of us understands and attempting to create within that uncertainty. Well, that's just a pile of liberal crap, in my opinion. She should have probably actually said something concrete in the speech besides just bitching at some senator who showed up to, you know, be the uh, the voice of ceremony there or whatever. Who cares about this? This is what I don't get. That she doesn't like it when people disrupt her speeches, but she basically called out. She called out the leader of one of her state's greatest politicians at the time over nothing. Edward Brooke was, an average senator. I wouldn't say that he was amazing, but um, that it's not as if he did anything to provoke that type of response. But then again, it's college, so I guess she had the right to do whatever she wanted, and freedom of speech. But she shouldn't treat it as if it's some sort of a great moment in history. What she said at a speech at speech at Wellesley in 1969, I think it was. Then on page 54, she mentioned that she worked for the law firm of Troy Haft, Walker, and Bernstein in passing. According to Dick Morris's Rewriting History, which is his parody of this book, Troy Haft was known in Oakland as a red lawyer. Now, red lawyer, what does that mean? Okay, so Bob Troy Haft was the main lawyer that was talked about here. And this was a guy who was active in the Communist Party until 1958, when they left due to the Khrushchev-Stalin speech. He was serving in Oakland for most of his career, and he was mostly working for a lot of these student radicals in the 60s and 70s. So for her to mention, basically, what does she say here? I told Bill about my summer plans to clerk at Troy Haft, Walker and Bernstein, a small law firm in Oakland, California, and he announced that he would like to go to California with me. I was astonished. I knew he had signed on to work in Senator George McGovern's presidential campaign, and the campaign manager, Gary Hart, had asked Bill to organize the South for McGovern. The prospect of driving from one southern state to another, convincing Democrats both to support McGovern and to oppose Nixon's policy in Vietnam excited him. Although Bill had worked in Arkansas on campaigns for Senator J. William Fulbright and others, and in Connecticut for Joe Duffy and Joe Lieberman, he never had the chance to be in on the ground floor of a presidential campaign. So she doesn't really go into anything about the Troy Hafts. Well, understandably so, because they were pretty much subversive lawyers in the 60s and 70s. For some people, that's not going to matter because they think of that as a heroic position. But if it was such a huge deal, I think Hillary Clinton would have mentioned at least something about their activities. On page 90, she claims that the Cuban riot at Fort Chaffee was not Bill Clinton's fault, and she forgets that originally the detainees were contained by a cotton rope barrier. That's from the Arkansas Times. Okay, I included the link in this PowerPoint. The PowerPoint I'll try to attach somehow or share with you guys. There's also, I found from People magazine, the original article. It said about this. It says how plagued by heat crime and snafus, the Fort Chaffee refugee camp becomes an American nightmare. This is from July 7th, 1980. This is before the election, in 1981, where Bill Clinton was ousted from office. It says at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, the air is filled with dust and flies and thickened by the acrid smell of asphalt melting under a relentless sun. Packs of lean, bare-chested young men cluster among shabby wooden barracks, bartering cigarettes for homemade knives and raisin whiskey. At the compound perimeter, sweating, unhappy U.S. troops keep watch against a recurrence of the rioting that erupted among the 19,000 Cubans last month. So that's 19,000 Cubans being housed on a, basically a base in Arkansas in the hot summer heat. Sorry about the redundancy. The summer heat, the sweaty summer heat of Arkansas. It says here, I got more sleep in Nam, and they were shooting us over there. Grouse's Staff Sergeant Michael Lucerno, who has spent a third of his 33 years in the Army. This is the worst duty I ever had. Fort Chaffee is a lock in the flow of Cuban refugees, a steady limbo between escape and destination, and to the Americans in charge of the camp, the job has been a nightmare. An estimated one-fourth of the Cubans arrived there sick, their ailments ranging from asthma to cerebral palsy to insanity, and a great many others are considered problems, some violent and some dangerous. Since the June 1st riot, Ku Klux Klansmen have been congregating near Fort Chaffee to rant about white power, and some residents of bordering towns have armed themselves against another outbreak. In the brutal heat, tempers of the GI Guards hover near the boiling point as well. We don't need guns, growls one soldier who was stationed at Chaffee after the riot. If any of the Cubans tries to break out again, we'd beat them to death with our clubs. In contrast to the Vietnamese refugees who came to this country with their leaders and with many families intact, the Cubans have no hierarchy in place, and maintaining discipline has been difficult. The marijuana some of the refugees brought with them from Cuba seems to have run out, but distilleries crop up around the compound as fast as they are shut down. The raisins and sugar needed to make the liquor are stolen from the camp kitchens. 3/4 of the camp population are classified as unaccompanied males. Gee, does that sound a little familiar? Many of them are gay, as homosexuality is a crime in Cuba, and guards continually face a problem of clearing unoccupied barracks of gay love nests. A heterosexual black market is also thriving. Oh, good to know there's variety there. There's 3 whorehouses working inside the compound, one soldier claims. The going price is a pack of cigarettes. The task of feeding, clothing, and processing these thousands of non-English speaking people would be awesome enough without such problems. Since most of the refugees arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs, the Red Cross outfits them at a cost of $34 a person. Every day the mess hall serves 9,000 eggs. Okay, then it goes through all this logistics. So they have $2.35 per person as a food budget. To be discharged from the camp, a Cuban must be screened, which involves medical exams and interviews to weed out the insane and dangerous. And a sponsor must be found who will guarantee a place to live, a job, and education for any children. Even to the best intentioned social workers, the challenge sometimes is too much. They complain that help from Washington is often half-hearted. I'm not a bleeding heart liberal who wants to pick up all the pieces, says David Lewis, 38, a former Marine captain who is now director of Migration and Refugee Services for the U.S. Catholic Conference. But it's not fair for President Carter to bring them in and then say, okay, Catholics, Lutherans, Baptists, you take care of them. If their honeymoon with relatives and sponsors ends in 2 weeks, where do they go? How about language and job training? How do we keep them from being a drain on the system? The more immediate problem for Fort Chaffee authorities is not so much official neglect as bureaucratic bumbling. In one case, the release of a Cuban physician, a man whose life had been threatened for reporting illegal activities to the authorities, was held up for several days awaiting security clearance for his 11-year-old daughter. So yeah, that's about it. I can attach this. This is what they they were claiming that it's not Governor Clinton's fault at the time. That's what that's what Hillary Clinton was trying to say, because he put down the riot that happened because he had them roped off instead of actually contained by a fence. Um, no, I don't think so. Then on page 98, she bragged about hunting in Arkansas and bagging a duck, and then how Chelsea got mad at her for it. Okay, so now as First Lady, she on page 120, she claimed Bill decided she would tackle the healthcare crisis with Ira Magazine, or that they remember there was a Clinton Care Health Plan, Hillary Claire Care. Um, but on page 148, she also claimed that Bill didn't inform the other members of his administration. Now that's strange because even, how can she claim that when she was also in on many of the cabinet meetings too? So one of them should have informed the people. Then on page 138, she had this bizarre conversation with Jackie Kennedy where she says, when I asked her if I should just turn myself over to a team of famous consultants, as some of the media had recommended, she looked horrified and said, "You have to be you." Well, I guess she didn't really take Jackie Kennedy's advice to heart, because she may be one of the most fake and opaque candidates that there is. Nobody knows what the hell Hillary Clinton is campaigning for. I don't think Hillary Clinton knows what she's campaigning for, except for Hillary Clinton. Um, then she said that okay, so then on page 200, it says that her brother Tony Rodham married Nicole Boxer, who was the daughter of Barbara Boxer, the senator from California. So that was a political marriage, and from there, which brought a lot of scandals with Tony Rodham. And it's funny how he got divorced in 2001 when they were out of the White House. I guess there really wasn't much use for him by then because he didn't have any power. The Clintons were out of the White House, so why would Boxer's daughter actually need him? If you read into Tony Rahm, there's a lot of different scandals he's involved in. A lot of them with the donations and the Clinton family businesses and whatever. And then on page 206, she claimed that Vince Foster's files were not tampered with by Bernie Nussbaum. However, if you read Christopher Ruddy on page 110 to 123, this is The Strange Death of Vince Foster. There are a lot of questions as to whether Nussbaum was truthful at all in his testimony as to where he was during the uh, aftermath of the death of Vince Foster. There's also evidence that U.S. Secret Service agent Henry O'Neill saw Maggie Williams, who was one of Hillary Clinton's personal aides, removing files from Vince Foster's office and putting them in her own. Now, page 221, she claimed that Webb Hubbell, who you might know is one of three members of Hillary's Rhodes law firm to get hired for the White House counsel office. One of the other ones was Vince Foster, and then there was William Kennedy, Bill Kennedy. So those two were hired for the White House counsel office. Webb Hubbell was made the Associate Attorney General, which is the third-ranking member of or official of the Justice Department. And he ended up going to prison for defrauding his partners at the Rose Law Firm where him, Clinton, and Foster had worked. And Hillary claims, oh, he only told me that there was just this dispute about a lawsuit that they had handled. No, I don't believe it. I believe that she did know what he was doing up to a point before that. I don't know if she knew about it when he was doing it, but she knew something about what he was doing. But I guess we'll never know. Page 221, she claimed that Webb Hubbell, blamed legal troubles on father-in-law, meaning that Hubbell lied to the Clintons. So yeah, I think that's the only thing to draw a conclusion from. Page 235, she describes a meeting in South Africa I think it was for either a funeral or a ceremony where she had to avoid Fidel Castro during the entire event. Um, then on page 251, she says that she called Dick Morris for advice on the 1994 congressional campaign. Now, this is a funny situation because a lot of the Clinton aides, the official Clinton aides like George Stephanopoulos and Leon Panetta, they hate Dick Morris. But what they can't account for is how President Clinton went for the Clintons went and looked for Morris. It wasn't the other way around. They wanted him on their team. He didn't. I don't think that he was as aggressive about getting onto their side and working with them, even either running up to the '94 campaign or after that when they were trying to save the presidency. Okay, page 270. She visited the Pakistan's first lady in who was in Purda. I think her name was uh, Leghari. That was her last name, which is total separation from any male members of society that aren't in her family. And then on the following page, to page 272, after meeting Benazir Bhutto, she gives this surprisingly, well thought out summary of Islamic life. As she says, she talks about how the women in Pakistan they're kind of living between two societies, and she says their successes in our country illustrated the importance of a well-functioning, non-corrupt government, a free market, a society that values religious traditions, and an environment free of violence and war. No country in South Asia has yet achieved all these conditions. Men and women who could have contributed to their own country's advancement are instead contributing to ours. Sri Lanka, for example, where I ended my trip, had a high rate of literacy for both men and women, but the country had lived in terror for years because of a guerrilla insurgency by the Hindu Tamil Tigers against a majority Buddhist Sinhalese population and government. The relentless campaign of terror undermined its potential for economic growth and foreign investment. Um, and then she goes right ahead and she visits Saudi Arabia. Um, or no, she just visited a Saudi mosque there. And then she starts criticizing Wahhabism. She says, like the Judeo-Christian Bible, the Quran is open to different interpretations, most of which promote peaceful coexistence with people of other religions. Some, like Wahhabism, do not. Wahhabism is an ultra-conservative Saudi brand of Islam that is gaining adherents around the world. While I deeply respect the basic tenets of Islam, Wahhabism troubles me because it is a fast-spreading form of Islamic fundamentalism that excludes women from full participation in their societies, promotes religious intolerance, and in its most extreme version, as we learned with Osama bin Laden, advocates terror and violence. Okay, then on page 284 to 85, she criticizes again Islamic fundamentalists for threatening the founder of the Grameen Bank, who was later a Nobel Prize winner. And she specifically says the word Islamic fundamentalists. Not even Islamic terror, but Islamic fundamentalists. Then on page 310, she complains about British Prime Minister John Major and his unearthing of Bill's war records during the 1992 election. Well, if you have such strong feelings about that, maybe you shouldn't have smeared your all other opponents, Obama and Sanders and Trump. Uh, you know, Smearing is pretty much the way that you win elections. And the fact of the matter is that later, when you needed to win the White House, Hillary Clinton, you sent people to dig up dirty secrets about Trump from the Ukrainian government. Yeah, so who the hell are you to complain about John fucking Major? Plus, truth of the matter is that the crap about Vietnam was true. Um, he did dodge Vietnam, and it was well known. It's not like it was some sort of secret, you know. The only thing that was up for debate was what he was doing in London instead, and he was participating in anti-American demonstrations. Um, then on page 350, she criticizes the American Spectator magazine for partisan attacks against her. This is a woman who would later go on to cooperate with Media Matters and other super PACs and smear machines that are virtually, the equivalent and probably worse on the Democratic side. Then on page 351 and 52, she gives, a 1 to 2 page summary of Ron Brown's death, and I was sad and whatever. Well, if you read Ron Brown's body, you see that this was a guy who the Clintons had him. I mean, this guy died at the right time for them because he was under investigation. He probably would have been convicted for numerous corruption charges, both for international fraud charges and domestic. Not to say that I'm glad he died, because I think if he would have gone to trial, it would have been a massive scandal for the Clinton administration, and it would have probably torpedoed their last 2 years. He was complicit in a lot of shady deals. Then on page 358, she had dinner with Václav Havel, who was the president of the Czech Republic, and he started warning her about how globalization feeds the desires of people to join with the far right and reject multiculturalism. And he said all of it, and she pretty much understood what he said, yet she chose in the end, years later, to ignore everything he said and embrace globalism. So I guess Václav Havel wasted a whole dinner on her. And yeah, this is the last slide. She talks about the corporate responsibility for childcare on page 382. What the hell does that even mean? Why is a corporation, any corporation, responsible for the child care of the residents? That's of the employees. It's ridiculous. But I guess you have to be some sort of globalist or communist nut job in order to believe that type of crap. Then in I have a misspelling here. Yeah. So then on page 445, you see the full text of her question and answer with Matt Lauer of NBC's Today Show, where she talks about the great right-wing conspiracy. What I didn't know was that this was in response to a question about Monica Lewinsky. So she claimed there was a vast right-wing conspiracy that started the scandal that exposed her husband for being a complete perv in the White House, and she blames the far right for it. Page 447, she complains about coping with the Lewinsky scandal by having to spend her time in the elite resort of Davos. And then on page 450, she gives the bullshit story of Chelsea Clinton being a jogger on 9/11, and that's since proven to be inaccurate to certain degrees. And then on page 503, she compares the Star Committee hearings to Chinese communist persecution in Wild Swan. Oh, have we gone a little bit too far there? Because apparently you got away with it, and Ken Starr's career was also not really touched. I'd rather say that he touched you with kid gloves. You can complain all you want about how they questioned you and they dragged you into court and attorney fees and blah blah blah, but that's not the same as in communist China. Anyway, so that's it. My assessment of the book. Obviously, the more important questions are all left out. First of all, how the hell does she stay married to this jackass for, what is it now, going on 50 years? Second of all, this is a person that seems every step of the way, if you read this book, it seems that life just got them to the right to the right situation. Anytime anything bad happened, she pretends as if, oh, that was just a minor miscalculation, and I can't really explain how we got there, but um, everybody knows that it's not my fault, and I'm Hillary Clinton, and just believe me. Well, I don't believe a single word she says. This whole book is pretty much a whitewashing of her entire time as First Lady. It talks a little in the end about her race for the Senate, um, and it's just so self-serving. I still have to give the book 2 stars at least, or two Slick Willys, just because she didn't. It's not like a horribly written book, but at the same and there's certain times when she does make a couple very interesting observations, and you can see that this is a person, whether she wrote the whole book or not. I don't think she wrote most of the book, but look, I mean, in order to understand Hillary Clinton, I think this is probably a good book, but it's the Hillary Clinton. It's the Hillary Clinton that she wants the world to see. It's not the Hillary Clinton that is the true person that we know her to be. So yeah, that's it. 2 Slick Willies for Living History. Tune in next time. There will probably be more of these. Just don't know how often. And check out the PowerPoint file too.